At the risk of, can you hear me? Is this the right tone? At the risk of doing this a couple times tonight, we are trying to get a little better organized. I know you think we're organized. We've had talks here for the last 10 years. And by the way, this is the 10th anniversary year of this organization officially. Even though we're a little cloudy when it started, it was certainly 10 years or more. But in recognition of that, that's gotten a number of us in the leadership to think through trying to get some things tightened up a bit and make it even a better experience. The first thing we've done is that this year, 2 months early, the membership forms are out for 2014. Anyone who joins from here on to the end of the year, you're a member throughout the whole year. So you can save us some postage. Some of you have never been members. You can pay $10 and join up. One of the things I wrote everyone that I was concerned that the membership had dropped a little this year. I can look at the membership and find that half or 2/3 of that drop is because people left the community, moved to Florida or whatever. And we're going to always have that. So this organization needs to keep building new members each year. So we welcome you and hope that you will join, and the forms are out there. We will do mailings, etc., for membership as we get late in December, but you could help us out by joining up before then. Number 2, our major way of communicating is and will continue to be by email, like most other organizations these days. Some of you in this room, you have not yet, because you're new, given us your email. We have a form, we have a sheet back there to do it. We have a plea. When you get to the email part of it, write it super carefully because we have trouble reading. Those of you who think we have your email, we also suggest that you give us your email because there are a number of bump backs that we're getting. And those of you who think you should be getting things and are not, you can tell Patty tonight, or you can send to the website, just let the website know that you're not getting it, and then we'll have your return email. This is...
Mike, some of us don't have email.
All right. The policy of this group is going to be as follows. We will mail, starting in January, we will mail every member every month or send an email, and we prefer the second. We want to keep the list as short as possible of having to mail, but this is a guarantee, is one of the tightening up, that starting for notices in January, that anyone who is a member will be getting a monthly notice. Helen Wilson, who's our speaker tonight, has been putting out this nice newsletter, which you've seen in the back. This is going to become a members newsletter, which will be emailed to those members each month that we have the email to, and will be mailed to the rest of them. So that is one reason to become a member, because we do want to give our members some extra benefits, and we're going to use the newsletter to do that. But the immediate thing tonight is anyone take the energy and go back over there and sign up, give us the email, even though you've been getting the notices, to make sure that we have everyone connected. Okay? The third thing I want to mention is that you need to get a list of our talks. The talks are now set till June. We have a talk every month till June. By the way, anyone who thought they were going to hear about the coffee tree tonight, you're probably going to get an even better talk this evening, but they had to reschedule till February, and we hope you all got that message. But Helen's a treat, and you're going to be very excited about what you're getting this evening. At any rate, the meeting notices are there. We will keep sending them out as reminders, but tonight you can know what you're going to get here till the end of June. And Helen's going to talk tonight about the poetry of Squirrel Hill and its history. In December, we're going to have a speaker. I haven't heard him, Helen has. He's supposed to be outstanding, to talk about the statistics of the history of Squirrel Hill. So they come nicely together. We have a talk on the mansions of Fifth Avenue, which folks are always very interested in, coming up in January. Someone who's written a book. We wanted to have a speaker like this for some time. So that's happening in January. And we will have the coffee tree in February. We will have an anniversary talk on the history of Tree of Life in the synagogue in March. In April, we're going to have a repeat, but by a different speaker, talk about the nationality rooms at Pitt. And there have been new ones since we had a talk about that 5 or 6 years ago. In April, we're going to have Randall Toys come and talk about the history of that long-standing outfit. And in June, a very interesting speaker on the Civil War in Pennsylvania. So lots of things lined up, lots of things coming beyond that, but now you know that. The last thing I want to talk about is that we need volunteers to do everything we'd like to do. You may think it's great that this group has talks once a month for 10 years, but there are a whole lot of things this group could be doing that we've not been able to do because, frankly, the leaders have been too busy to ask for volunteers, and we're going to start asking a lot heavier for help, beginning with some things that some of us have done, but to be frank, kind of tired out. Let me mention, there's a sign-up sheet there on the table. This will be there every meeting from now on, and you can always call me. But let me go through 7 categories of things that we would like our members to do more of. The first one is we would love to have someone that isn't Helen Wilson or Pat Hughes or Ralph Lund set up the meeting places on our Tuesday night meetings. You know, we've been coming here at 6:30 or 6:45, me less than others, to set the chairs up. You guys have been great about folding them up at the end, but it would really be nice to think that some of us could work on the speech and the equipment. Someone else could have a key and come in and open this place up. So that's one task. A second task is, obviously, and we're getting a nice crowd tonight, we've had a very good PR operation that Pat has run. It would be very nice to have Pat Hughes have help, or even one day take over the function of contacting people about our meetings. So there's a public relations function. A third thing is Helen and I have sort of shared membership coordination for this group. We could get more members if someone was specializing in monitoring who's signing up or not and thinking of other ways of recruiting new members. So that's also on the list. A fourth thing, and this can get very exciting, and this is not something we've felt able to ask about before. We would like very much, with Helen kind of leading the way, to get a bunch of researchers. You know, we know the overall history of Squirrel Hill. We got started learning it when we put the book together. And by the way, the book has sold 4,100 copies since we put it out, which is a pretty nice number. I just got that the last couple days. But there are all sorts of levels of Squirrel Hill history, block by block, etc., that we don't know nothing about. And this comes out a lot when people send anecdotal questions to us on the website, and we have to scramble to try to find out. So I've already gotten one volunteer from a meeting we had last week, but if you sign up researchers, probably Helen, someone will get in touch with you, and we will have interesting research projects. If we find someone who has enough time, we can even apply for some interns. But we need someone to supervise those interns, and the folks who've been doing this so far, you know, we just can do so much. And another thing, an exciting project that we're pursuing now is seeing whether or not we can get into a cooperative venture with the library. The Carnegie Libraries have for years wanted to keep all historical information down at the Pennsylvania Room downtown. We have tried before to say to them, we have a bunch of stuff. We have tapes from all of our meetings, we have old newspapers, we have some photographs. that it would be nice to not be stored in some of our basements. And the logical place would be to have a Squirrel Hill corner at the library. Well, we're having a meeting sometime later this week to broach the idea again. Well, if we do that, the amount of information we have now in the archives turns from being stuff that we feel bad about not sharing to not being enough to keep a corner, sort of running for a long period of time. And we would need people to start actually searching out, using press relations, etc., to start searching out archived material from Squirrel Hill history that would be part of this. We haven't been wanting to do that if all of it happened is that it gets stored, down below. The last thing on my list that I remember, I put this down, I don't really expect this to ever happen because it's so much work, but if there's some magical person in this crowd that wants to start planning for a house tour for Squirrel Hill, we will give you maximum support in doing it. That's the least likely, I understand, of what I put in there. But we've done good stuff this first decade. We'd like to make this a more participatory group in the years to come. So please, if not tonight, think about whether you can give some time to do one of these activities. The sheet is set up there that all you do is write your name and phone number if you're interested in any of that. So that's the business meeting. You're going to get this from now on our meetings in order to get you all more involved in what we're doing. Sometimes I think your leadership, me especially, got so busy. I'm retired now, so it's easier to think about these things. Got so busy that having volunteers was harder than not having volunteers. And that's true. But we'd like to see more people get involved in this as we go forward. Obviously, we're going to continue the speaking. Oh, the last thing I put down, and I'm getting a lot of help, but anyone who wants to work with me to get speakers, I got lots of good ideas last week, but actually work getting some speakers for us to talk to people, find that they're interested, and then we set it up in our schedule. That's another function that I would invite you to get involved in. You came to hear about Squirrel Hill history. Helen Wilson is our vice president. Most of you know her. Most of you have read her wonderful articles in the Squirrel Hill News on our behalf. Helen is super active over at the Turner Cemetery and the Methodist Church over there. And she has developed this talk that we're going to hear tonight. It is a version of a talk that she was actually asked to give at Osher, at CMU Osher, right?
Pitt Osher.
Pardon me?
Pitt
Osher. So you're in for a treat. Helen, come on up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to ask you first, please hold your questions until the end because this is a shortened version of the Pitt talk, but if I stop, I could talk maybe for an hour about every slide I'm going to show you. So I'll get through the slides and then we'll have questions, okay? Now I called my presentation The Development of Squirrel Hill, A Journey Through Time and Art, because it's going to be a very visual presentation showing geological, historical, and political forces that shaped Squirrel Hill into what it is today. Here's what it is today. If you don't know where Squirrel Hill is by now, eastern part of Pittsburgh, depending on who's counting, 92 neighborhoods, and it's the largest neighborhood. I get asked this question a lot, what are the boundaries of Squirrel Hill? And officially, according to the City of Pittsburgh, 2003, this boundary comes along 5th Avenue, down Shady, notice Chatham is inside Squirrel Hill, along Wilkins, South Dallas, Forbes, Homewood Cemetery is outside, Frick Park for the most part is inside. Here's Fern Hollow Bridge. The border comes down 9 Mile Run all the way to the river and then along the river to right where the Homestead Grays Bridge is. But it doesn't come up Browns Hill. It comes up Desdemona to Imogene, and at Imogene Road, where that meets Browns Browns Hill Road. That's where it comes up Browns Hill. And at Hazelwood Avenue, this is a big intersection at the top of Browns Hill Road, it does a dogleg onto Saline. Now, Saline Street is one of the oldest roads in Pittsburgh, in the Squirrel Hill area, and it used to go from here all the way to here, and it's been wiped out in several places, but where it still exists, it's the border. So it comes along Saline Street, does a dogleg onto Monitor, then here's Beechwood, the ramp to the Parkway, goes to Forward, and then follows southern end of Shenley Park until it gets to the Junction Hollow Trail, which used to be Boundary Street, and I wish it still was because that was a great way outside to get out of Oakland. But anyway, when you get up to Carnegie Mellon, which is in Squirrel Hill, it becomes Boundary Street, and you can drive on it, and then South Neville. So, now the boundary between Squirrel Hill North and Squirrel Hill South is Frew Street to Shenley Drive to Forbes Avenue. Now, I've had people tell me that 15217 is Squirrel Hill, but not necessarily, because you can see it's very arbitrary. Carnegie Mellon is outside, it has the Oakland zip code. Chatham has the Shadyside zip code, but Homewood Cemetery has the Squirrel Hills, 15217. Frick Park goes along with Regent Square. Duck Hollow, which is in Swiss Elm Park, has 15217. And then Glen Hazel and part of Hazelwood and Greenfield have 15217. So there's not an exact match. And to make things even more complicated, District 8 includes most of Squirrel Hill North, but not all of it. Some of District 5 goes up into North Squirrel Hill, so go figure. I'm not going to deal with a lot about the demographics because Chris is going to cover that next month. But just quickly, Squirrel Hill is the largest and the most diverse neighborhood in Pittsburgh. Population over 26,000, and that's the size of a small city. Its population's been increasing. The census figures 79% white, 14% Asian, 3% African American, and others 4%. And the census doesn't include Hispanic Latino as a separate racial category, but it does ask if the people in these categories identify themselves as Hispanic Latino. So 3.5 of the people in these categories identify themselves as Hispanic Latino. Can't talk about Squirrel Hill without talking about it being Pittsburgh's Jewish neighborhood. And in 2010, depending on which study you're looking at, about 33 or 40% of Squirrel Hill's residents were Jewish. And a side note, the Jewish population of Squirrel Hill never exceeded 50%. But Squirrel Hill is the last densely urban Jewish population in the United States outside of New York City. And it's retained its vitality long after most urban Jewish communities moved to the suburbs. And that's a very important statistic. And again, that would be something that Chris is going to talk about next time, because we're going to look way back into the past. Squirrel Hill didn't begin to develop its Jewish identity until the early 1900s, so that's pretty late. So how did Squirrel Hill develop from this? And George Washington, on his way to Fort Duquesne to tell the French to get out of western Pennsylvania before the French and Indian War, drew a map. Squirrel Hill, oops, sorry, wrong button. Anyway, right here, Squirrel Hill, this I think is probably Turtle Creek, that's the Youghiogheny River. Not much happening in 1753. And to this, Squirrel Hill today, much more crowded, lots more roads. So who came to Squirrel Hill? Who were here first? The squirrels. And eastern gray squirrel, the most common one you see on the electric wires. American red squirrel, a little bit smaller. I see them in Frick Park. Fox squirrel seems to hang around in Shenley Park or on the college campuses. And there's Murray the squirrel, our mascot. Now, Native Americans, of course, were the first humans to come to Squirrel Hill. Meadowcroft, 16,000 years old. The is only 60 miles away. And these early Americans would have come up the rivers and the creeks. Some years ago, 3,000-year-old Steubenville stem spear point was found in some disturbed ground at Turner Cemetery. And Steubenville refers to a late archaic culture that was centered around Steubenville. It's a beautiful little spear point, and right now Mercyhurst has it. Early settlers wrote about Indian mounds around Squirrel Hill. They were probably made by the Adena culture, which were the first of the 3 mound-building cultures. This mound was partially excavated by Carnegie Museum archaeologists in the Keys Rocks. It's still there. But all the mounds in Squirrel Hill have disappeared. One was supposed to be up on Beacon Street, and some others coming down, coming up from Hazelwood and going across the hill to Wilkinsburg, but they're all gone. No evidence at all of any permanent Native American settlements. Squirrel Hill was probably a seasonal hunting ground. This picture is from a diorama at Old Bedford Village, and it shows what a source called a deserted old Indian fort in 9 Mile Run Valley, or something similar to that. But I think the word fort probably refers to the fact that villages were surrounded by these logs to protect them. Notice wigwams, not teepees, for the Eastern Woodlands Indians. And I know you've all been wondering, but it's believed that the Native Americans were the first to call Squirrel Hill because of all the pesky squirrels. The name is very, very old. There was a grist mill in 9 Mile Run Valley, and some people think that the French built it before the French and Indian War. That's one thing I'd like to research to see if there's any firm evidence. But there was a grist mill. And this isn't a picture of it. It's completely gone. But this is the oldest looking grist mill I could find. And I don't know, I don't know if you can see the water wheel. That would have been in 9 Mile Run to turn the grist mills, the millstones. These would have turned to grind the grain into flour. And I did skip that after the French and Indian War, the mill passed into the hands of the Pollock family, and later to John Swisshelm, and that name you're familiar with. He was the father-in-law of Jane Grey Swisshelm, and Swisshelm Park is named for him and the huge farm he had there, and not Jane Grey. You'll see that sometimes in some writings. And since we're in Frick Park, this is an architectural rendering of the new planned nature center, third incarnation, I think. So I think that broken ground. I'm not sure. So the next place we're going to go is one of Squirrel Hill's treasures. Is named by the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition, the Squirrel Hill Post Office mural. It's painted by Alan Thompson in 1942 as part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal program to help struggling artists survive during and right after the Depression. Now, he called it History of Squirrel Hill, but I think it should be called Squirrel Hill Then and Now. But when New Deal artists got these commissions, they were asked to go to the community and talk to a committee of people who were going to tell them what they wanted on the wall of their post office. And I think it's obvious that Alan Thompson came to Squirrel Hill and walked around because on this side, on the left side, right in the middle, he puts an Orthodox Jew and even surrounds him with a halo of light to emphasize his importance. There's also a reference to the greengrocers on Murray, and I think a lot of us remember them. And Alan Thompson, being an illustrator as well as an artist, has a sense of humor in his characters. And these figures lead your eye back to the newsboy, who leads your eye to the soldier because it is World War II. And that leads you back into the, here's a little squirrel looking up from the tree, and then the woman with the dog at the fire hydrant, and the guy almost getting run over by the trolley. This scene is on Forbes and Shady because here's Adele's. And then with artistic license, he puts alderdice towering over everything. Okay, now on this side, this is more problematical. A recent exhibition of New Deal murals down at the Boast Building, this was a few years ago, Pennsylvania New Deal murals, ignored the right side of the mural. And all the other Pennsylvania murals were shown in their entirety in full color, but in the Squirrel Hill mural only showed the left side, and I asked the curator why when he was giving the talk, and he said, well, 2 reasons. First of all, you can't see the river from Squirrel Hill, and second, there's no evidence of Indian attacks in the early days. So let's deal with the river first. About that view of the Monongahela River, yes, you can see the river from Squirrel Hill. I can see it from my house, but this is a better picture because I live over this way. This is a scene from Calvary Cemetery, which is on Squirrel Hill. It's not in it anymore, but it's not in the community of Squirrel Hill, but it is on Squirrel Hill. And what you see, this is looking east. So this is Braddock, Rankin, Swissvale, Edgewood. Squirrel Hill continues over here. This is the waterfront. It's a lower floodplain. Browns Hill Road. And on a very clear day, here you can see 50 miles to Chestnut Ridge. So it's quite a view. Now, a bit about geology. Flat horizon line. We know we're part of the Appalachian Plateau here. So the hills eroded down from the top. They weren't pushed up as much by tectonic forces. Notice where the houses spread out on the far hillsides. They're not at the top. They're not at the bottom. They're sort of on a plain right in the middle. Well, this was the water level in the Ice Age. Believe it or not. It's hard to believe. What was happening was that during the Ice Age, the huge ice sheets several times came down to about where Moraine State Park is, 60 miles north of Pittsburgh. There were huge amounts of meltwater flowing south. And Squirrel Hill, because it was high ground, was an island. As the ice sheets receded and water levels dropped, a wide flat valley was left around Squirrel Hill. And you can still see this. This is a modern Google topographical map. This valley, and if you know the history of East Liberty, this is East Liberty, Wilkinsburg, Ardmore Boulevard, Turtle Creek, Braddock. It was as important as the rivers to the development of Pittsburgh because settlement, industry, roads, and especially railroads followed the valley downtown. Squirrel Hill, it was avoided. It was a hill. It was high. You didn't go up and down unless you had to. Now, let me see. I just want to go back to this. No, that's okay. I'll just go this way. Here, this one. Okay. The fact that Squirrel Hill was a hill, that shaped its destiny. Red line shows the hill. The yellow line shows the present-day neighborhood. So you can see there's a bit of a difference because here's part of Point Breeze. Here's part of Glen Hazel, Hazelwood, Greenfield. It's all part of the hill that's Squirrel Hill, and you can actually trace its borders, either driving or just visually. And before I leave this slide, I just want to point out that this is 9 Mile Run, and when you went to the top, the ground sloped down into the Saline Street Valley all the way to here, and that becomes important a little bit later. But anyway, back to the skirmishes. After the French were defeated in 1763, English treaties gave the land west of the mountains to the Indians. Lands reserved for the Indians. But that didn't stop the settlers. They were hungry for land. There was all that land there and nobody on it. So as they pushed west into Indian territory, the Indians fought back. So skirmishes did occur. And they occurred even after the Revolutionary War. There were several. Pontiac's War, I think, is the most well-known. But there were several wars up to even at the beginning of the 1800s. The reason I mentioned Simon Girty, turncoat hero, the most hated man on the early American frontier, is because he's a Squirrel Hill guy. The Girty family owned a large farm on Squirrel Hill. But Simon Girty and 2 of his brothers I don't know if defected is the right word, but they chose to fight for the British side during the Revolutionary War. And since they had been raised by Indians for about 10 years when they were young, they fought in and dressed sometimes as Indians. So they got a reputation of being sort of white Indians, I guess. But anyway, after the war, they had to leave town, and the half-brother, the young half-brother, John Turner, inherited the farm. Now, Squirrel Hill, West Virginia. If you look at this map, you can see that this part of Pennsylvania was claimed by Virginia, and if you look around, you can see that the claims were all over the place. People, like different colonies, claimed lots of other places. But in 1779, the Revolutionary War was going on, and they had to settle these claims in order to concentrate on fighting a common enemy. So in 1779, they agreed to extend the Mason-Dixon line, which went only this far before because it was too dangerous to go any farther. Pennsylvania got this. This was the Ohio line. And Erie wasn't sold to Pennsylvania until after the war. So if that claim if Virginia's claim had been upheld, you remember that Virginia left, West Virginia left Virginia in the Civil War, so we would be Squirrel Hill, West Virginia. So anyway, Pitt Township. In the late 1700s, the first community on Squirrel Hill began to grow around the top of what is now Browns Hill Road. Now, Pitt Township was pretty big, and it was mostly either undeveloped or farmland. So there were a few places where communities developed, and one was right here at the top of Browns Hill Road, and it's sort of still there. It's called Greenfield nowadays. But it developed because settlers from the south, from Maryland and Virginia, were coming up along Braddock's Road, which was kind of parallels. It was sort of Route 40. But they crossed the river and came along. Braddock only got to Braddock, of course, but the road was continued. And when they got to the mouth of 9 Mile Run, they had a choice. They could go all the way down here and up this way to downtown, or they could climb up. If you remember that other map, they could climb up to the top of the 9 Mile Run slope to the top of Browns Hill Road and take a rest up here before they started to go down Saline Street, down that ravine. And it was a shortcut, and it was downhill. There's two other red dots on this map. 9 Mile Run had a salt lick, and early on, settlers dug a brine mine down there and mined salt, and it wasn't mined, it was a well that brought salty water up. Coal was mined all around here, and one of the first uses for that coal was to boil the brine to get the salt, which is badly needed. You have to have salt. You can't live without salt. So the next thing on the map is Killyman Stewart's Inn. This is a later picture of it, but William Killyman built an inn at the top of the hill in 1819. He thought, this is a great place. Here's what he had over his bar. Here, nothing grows old but whiskey, men, and jokes. So people who were traveling west, coming up 9 Mile Run slope to this small community, cattle drovers driving their cattle, and even people out for country drives would stop at this inn. And one of the reasons they did was because here's the inn, and this is a later picture. It's 30s probably, because this is Brown's Bridge. It's still there, so that was replaced in the late 30s. But here's that view again, the same view from Calvary. If you went out on a country drive and stopped for a break here, you had a gorgeous view to look at. Another reason this picture looks like it's from the 30s is this is before this homestead was wiped out to build the larger steel mills during the war. So the inn lasted until 1949. I still hear stories about this inn. It was torn down to construct the Beechwood Gardens apartment complex, so that's where it was. Where is it? This is Browns Hill Road coming up along here. This is on a curve of Beechwood Boulevard, about half mile away from the big intersection at the top of Browns Hill Road. Not everybody, but a lot of people get the idea that this area was a trackless wilderness before the settlers came and tamed it, but that's very far from the truth, because even if you were a Native American, you're going to get lost in the trackless wilderness. So early on, the Native Americans had a very well-established system of trails that they maintained, and they were either the easiest or the quickest way to get somewhere. And easiest if you were trading or visiting, and quickest if you were on the warpath. So now notice there's none right here where Squirrel Hill is. Braddock's Road was coming up along here. But there were Indian trails in Squirrel Hill, and one of the ways you can tell is to look at what the oldest roads were. I talked about the settlement at the top of Browns Hill Road. The Saline Street was one of those very, very old roads. The second, Phillips Avenue between Shady and what is now Beechwood Boulevard, that road would have gone down into the East Liberty Valley. Third was on Forbes near Shenley Park, and again, that would have come off the hill down into Oakland and towards town. Last vestige of the first community is Turner Cemetery, and I'm researching that. So it's located about a block away from the top of the Browns Hill Road intersection. Second oldest cemetery in Pittsburgh. The first was Trinity Burial Ground downtown on 6th Avenue. I should say the second oldest that's still in existence. But we know a lot about the graveyard, and I've been putting it on my website, turnercemetery.org. But we don't know how many people are buried there or where they're buried, because it was abandoned. The church that was maintaining it closed in 1880, and it never belonged to the church. The cemetery was always a community graveyard, but Mary Brown and its predecessors always maintained it. But when the church closed in 1880, cemetery became wild and overgrown. This picture's from 1903. Some families even disinterred their family members, and a lot of them went to Homewood Cemetery. But anyway, in 1908, the grand new Mary S. Brown Memorial Chapel was built by two sons of Mary Brown to honor her memory. And the church was beautiful, and they cleaned up the cemetery, but in the process, they moved the gravestones around. And I think they're still moving around, because sometimes I go back and they're not in the same place. So anyway, that's Mary Brown today. It's still beautiful, but not very good shape, unfortunately, blackened from years of pollution. So in 2013, an archaeology student from Mercyhurst studied Turner Cemetery. And here she is using a flux gate gradiometer. It's a type of magnetometer. She's looking for anomalies that could indicate burials. This is her preliminary results. This is only the bottom 40 meters. This is only half of the cemetery. If you can see these red dots up here in this red spot, those are where the gravestones are, but this is where the graves are. So we knew that there wouldn't be a lot of correlation, but we are glad to see that eventually when we get better readings, we can mark these graves. Now, the warranty map, love this map. It was compiled in the early 1900s, but these are the first land grants ever in the Squirrel Hill area, and there's a lot of writing in small print here, so I simplified it. I know it's still a little hard to read, but what you see right here, John Turner, he called his estate, it was an English custom to name your estate or your farm because I guess that was a way of identifying, so you could say, well, you go down the street to Federal Hill. John Turner's brothers, half-brothers, if you remember, were the Gerdys, and they were considered traitors. John wanted to make sure that people knew he was loyal to the United States, so Federal Hill. Still the name of the little street beside the cemetery. Jay Castleman, I love his name, Castlemania. Sounds very modern. Here's Killy Moon Stewart's property. And it's interesting to see that there's some women who own property through here. John Woods from like Wood Street downtown. But anyway, Mount Airy Tract, you've heard of that. That was Mary Shenley's. She gave it to the city to create Shenley Park. And above that is Ambrose Newton. And he built 2 log cabins that are still in Shenley Park. He built the Martin log cabin and the Neil log house. And I know the Martin log cabin is not open for visitors. This one used to be. I don't know what condition it's in now. So the next change was that Squirrel Hill became part of Peebles Township. And this was until 1868. Now look how big Peebles is. Allegheny River, Monongahela River, border of Pittsburgh, border of Wilkinsburg. So Peebles Township was to the east of Pittsburgh. And the population of this whole area was only 2,700 people. So it was very sparsely settled. Going to the Civil War, nothing much happened in Squirrel Hill. The biggest thing on Squirrel Hill was that Fort Black was built at the top of, it's in Greenfield now, in the highest point in Greenfield. It's part of a circle of these earthworks that was built around Pittsburgh to protect it because Pittsburghers thought that General Lee was coming up to attack them. And you've had some Civil War talks. Lee might have indeed captured the city if he had gone there instead of to Gettysburg because Pittsburgh was rather lightly defended. But anyway, there's absolutely no sign of the fort left because some children were almost drowned in one of the ponds that was left from the trenches, so they just covered everything up. The main contribution of Squirrel Hill to the Civil War was its men. They were assigned to various companies. They didn't have just one company. And in the foyer of Mary Brown Church, there's 53 Civil War soldiers' names carved on this massive plaque, along with a few from some of the other wars. Sculptor, well-known George T. Brewster, foundry, well-known Gorham Manufacturing Company. Few of the soldiers are buried in Turner Cemetery, and we're not sure how many. We get different, we need to research that more. Homewood Cemetery has a GAR section, and there's Civil War soldiers buried there, including, if anybody lives on Ebdy Street, Charles Ebdy is buried here. It's typical of the GAR cemeteries. The cannons are buried face down. Now, right up from that is the Pyramid Mausoleum, and notice the name. It's W. Harry Brown. He was one of the 2 brothers that built Mary Brown Church. They were a very wealthy family, owned a lot of coal mines, Squirrel Hill and everywhere else, and they had a fleet of steamboats to carry the coal all the way down to New Orleans, so they could build things like this and have mansions. So the next thing that happened to Squirrel Hill became part of the 22nd Ward of Pittsburgh. It was annexed in 1868. Notice in the 22nd Ward, there's no delineation of Squirrel Hill, Regent Square, Point Breeze. It's all one. The word Squirrel Hill doesn't appear on there anywhere. It's just Ward 22. Black line shows the present borders of Squirrel Hill. Then, electric trolleys changed everything. The rail lines first started to be used in Pittsburgh in 1886. Now, if you could afford it, you did not have to live within walking distance of where you worked. Major, major change. Squirrel Hill became a residential neighborhood when the electric trolley tracks were laid from downtown Pittsburgh to Squirrel Hill around 1893. Now, 2 Murray Avenue bridges. We're on our 3rd incarnation. There's the first, trolley only, 2nd, trolley traffic, and the 3rd, no trolley. Now what that caused, one of the things that caused was that the trolley tracks came up Forbes and split into 2 routes at Murray. And Murray really didn't exist on its other end until the trolleys came along, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, that made the area a bustling business hub, and it still is today, of course. Only that's an early morning picture, so it's not too bustling. One of the effects of the trolleys, all that wide open land, all those estates and large farms became prime real estate. So developers started to buy up these large farms and these estates and subdivided them. Does that sound familiar? It's happening today as you go along the highways. Businessmen flocked to build houses in the new developments, and they commuted to work. And you can see Douglas Street, Phillips Place. You can see the lot still there, except for that which is Colfax School, which just had its 100th anniversary in 2011. Now, that lot plan was from this book, Squirrel Hill Homes. And I think it's interesting that it says thousands of dollars have been spent in paving, grading, sewering, and almost all of this has been done in the last year or so. So this was a very rapid change. There's a corner of Forbes and Murray, there's a house. That's not there anymore. But this house is very near that house, and if you look, this window is very much like that window. And if you go down Murray and look up, a lot of the storefronts are still the houses. They're still there. Now, the trolley route expanded down across the river in 1895. That brought middle and upper level management from the steel mills, the smoky part, the polluted part, up to the fresher air up here. So they flocked to Squirrel Hill, the northern part, not Squirrel Hill North, but the northern part as well. Crossing the Monongahela was always a problem. In the days before dams, you could ford it, although the current still made that dangerous. You could go by boat. When steamboats were invented, there were ferries. Now, this is 6 Mile Run Ferry, which was about around where Sandcastle is. But there was one up from 9 Mile Run, from Homestead to what was then called North Homestead, which is Duck Hollow. That was called North Homestead. But a little bit up from the 9 Mile Run, the mouth of 9 Mile Run. So, Captain Sam Brown, the other brother who built Mary Brown Church, decided that he saw a business profit to be made in building a bridge. Bridges in those days were built as business propositions. They were tolled, and they collected tolls on the trolleys, on the carriages, on the people, and later on the automobiles. So the bridge opened in 1895. The bridge had a major problem. When it got to Homestead, remember those train tracks that are still there? Well, that bridge, let me show you this bridge again. Over here, traffic was stopped up to 2 hours a day because of all the trains. That was a major road blockage. So the Homestead High Level Bridge avoided that problem. It flew right over those train tracks. And this bridge is so incredible that I could give a whole talk just on this, so we're not going to do that. But anyway, back to Captain Sam. One of the most unusual events that happened in Squirrel Hill was that he had a mansion down on the riverbank near 9 Mile Run. And he really loved this mansion, although he didn't live in it at the time. He'd given it to his niece and her husband. But the railroad wanted the land. He didn't want the house torn down, so being very wealthy, he paid the John Eichley Jr. Company, civil engineering firm, to move that house up 168 feet up this bluff. That's near the Homestead High Level Bridge. And then roll it back 500 feet from the edge. And in those days, you did it with manpower alone. You cribbed it up inch by inch. Supposedly not even one window pane was broken in the move. Unfortunately, the mansion burned down 10 years later. some people say that this is the mansion. You might see that some places, but I have the article that shows the burnt hulk. The mansion was burnt down. This is a mansion that was put on its place. But the property was eventually bought by the Jewish Home for the Aged, which had opened in 1906 in the Hill District. And it moved to the old Brown Estate in 1933. And it's now the Jewish Association on Aging. And you can still see the Brown Bridge here. And just from comparing old maps with new ones, it looks like the house was about here. This is Browns Hill Road and the bridge, and the Monongahela River, and here is, in comparison, that's about where the house was. Now, the Jewish migration to Squirrel Hill. Jewish Home for the Aged was just one of many Jewish institutions that moved to Squirrel Hill in the early 20th century. And these organizations and synagogues moved here because that's where their congregations moved. So they followed their congregations. And a lot of it was very clearly spelled out in this book. First large group of Jews was mostly from Allegheny City, which is now North Side. Many were well-to-do and many lived in housing like this. They wanted to escape what they felt was corrupt government in Allegheny City, which is why they didn't move north to Brighton Heights and that area. They moved east to get out of Allegheny City. And they wanted to move to a suburb where they could have beautiful new houses away from pollution. But while that was going on, Allegheny City was being annexed by Pittsburgh in a very messy process that began in 1906, and after some lawsuits was finalized in 1911. So the old ward numbers were discarded because they overlapped, and new numbers were assigned to the wards. Squirrel Hill became part of the 14th ward, and that is what it still is today, along with Point Breeze North, Regent Square, and Swiss Elm Park. Now, the Jewish migration continued as another movement of Jews to Squirrel Hill was caused by, or was helped, I should say, by the development of the automobile around 1905 and the opening of the Boulevard of the Allies around 1927. These Jews were mostly from Eastern Europe. They had first settled in the Hill District and Oakland. And this is, if any of you have ever been in the UC, the University Commons building in Carnegie Mellon, this Douglas Cooper mural is huge and it goes all the way around the atrium. This part shows crowded Oakland and very uncrowded Squirrel Hill, Shenley Park. And Boulevard of the Allies led directly into the heart of Squirrel Hill, so that caused that part of the central and south part of Squirrel Hill to fill with housing. Now, the movement of Jews in Squirrel Hill continued through the 20th century, especially around the end of World War II, and then in the 1970s from Russia. Many people who grew up in Squirrel Hill love to reminisce about the good old days, and we could spend a whole talk about that, but there's just a few pictures. So that Isley's moved around a bit. Squirrel Hill today is a quiet residential neighborhood with a lively business district, many ethnic stores and restaurants, especially Asian, are appearing along Forbes and Murray as the population becomes more diverse. And Jewish Squirrel Hill today, this is a quote from the Squirrel Hill Project, which was going on over the winter. Jewish Squirrel Hill is the envy of other Jewish places because of the interconnectedness of the people and resources and their willingness to work together. And as an illustration, I chose the walking tour they had in May, and you could see just some of the congregations and synagogues and other Jewish organizations that are all over Squirrel Hill. Full Circle, one of the oldest areas of Squirrel Hill, is also one of the newest. 9 Mile Run Valley, said to be the place where the first documented log cabin in Squirrel Hill was built by Colonel James Byrd, very interesting character in 1760. He was only in Pittsburgh for a little while. But the valley remained rural because landowners were unwilling to sell their prized farms and estates. But then the trolley lines came along, and these trolley lines came along 2nd Avenue, and 2nd Avenue did come all the way. I wish 2nd Avenue continued from Glenwood to under Squirrel Hill and all the way out to Braddock, but it doesn't do that anymore, unfortunately. But anyway, as those trolley tracks came along, that opened the valley for development. So developers were starting to buy up the land there. And as you can see, this picture, you might have heard of John Kane, very famous Pittsburgh folk artist. Again, from Calvary, 9 Mile Run seen from Calvary. It's a great place to go and look at the view. But the development didn't happen because, as we all know, starting in 1922, the Duquesne Slag Company bought up land. They bought it up very sneakily, lot by lot, and very quietly. So by the time they started dumping there and the lawsuit started, there was really nothing that protesters could do. So the dumping continued until 1972, in which is that 238 acres of the valley were covered by 200 million tons of slag, 20 stories high. Now today, Somerset sits on top of the slag, and it's a beautiful development. Squirrel Hill layer cake. If you look at 9 Mile Run Valley across the Monongahela River from the waterfront, you can see the layers of Squirrel Hill. The river's at about 700 feet above sea level. Mouth of 9 Mile Run, very historic bridge, I can't quite make it from this angle, 1886. Was 2nd Avenue. Now it's the Duck Hollow Trail. It also carries traffic to Duck Hollow, which is here. Here's the Duquesne Slag Company wharf that brought slag to the slag dump. Right here is the last bit of Brown's Bridge that's left. It's a stone abutment. So you can see that, just that little last remnant of the bridge. There's B&O railroad tracks along here that aren't used very much. Here's the slag dumps, 120 feet high. Then along here is Somerset. And here's another parallel road, and that's Beechwood Boulevard. That's the level of the water in the Ice Age. That's an Ice Age shelf. This is the Weiss House, the one that's been featured in Shady Avenue magazine and the Squirrel Hill magazine. And they built there because of the view. They get that same beautiful view. Coal mines were high in Squirrel Hill. Not so much in Greenfield, there's more undermining, but most of the mines are way, way up here. And sitting right at the top, not the highest point in Squirrel Hill, but the highest point in this picture is Landview. Highest point is on Beacon, but it wouldn't show in this picture. Abandoned coal mines. I didn't find. This is the 4 Mile Run watershed. Most of 4 Mile Run is in culverts. I couldn't find a map showing the mines there, but this is the 9 Mile Run watershed. Coal mines around Landview, around Moorfield, Frick Park, and about around Beacon. These are very, very, very old mines, early 1800s, mom and pop mines. So they're not really on too many maps. But anyway, what I think is also interesting is the gas wells in 9 Mile Run. So there they are. Okay, that's it. I like this saying, the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. Thank you.
Well, we live on Lilac Street by Minnesota School, and when we first moved here, we had we're in the 6000s, and we had to find a house on the other side of Saline Street, which turned out to be, I think, 700 or 800. Just the addresses just abruptly changed from 60 to 10 or 9 or something like that, 11. So it made finding things a little difficult when we were first here, you know.
That's typical Squirrel Hill, but an interesting thing about that area is that they're filling in those huge concave areas in the road now.
Tell us about it.
The mines were not under Minadeo, but someone told me that under Timberlane Quartz, they had to fill in some mines there. And that mine shows on an old map. It was owned by, I think, the Such family. So that is on a very old map.
About mines, people on Monitor Street who live between Beechwood and Beechwood, kind of right across from the old St. Philomena's, the JEC, tell of holes that they found in their basement where their foot went through the bottom of their basement and underneath was a coal mine that had to be excavated and filled in. Yeah, it's really big.
Yes, these mines are really old, so even if you go to the city and look, some of them, they call them mom and pop mines, just serving just the family
Apparently
sometimes.
that one had to do with the development of St. Philomena, and there was some connection there.
Well, another connection on that area is that one of those houses was actually the rectory of St. Philomena's, right on that part of Monitor. So it's an interesting area. Maybe there was a connection that way.
Yes.
Speaking of coal and coal mines, most of the early mines are simply mined by the people who live in the houses on the property. Coal does not become a separate estate, I think, until 1850 or 1860. Before then, the coal belongs to the person who owns the land, and he can't sell it off separately without selling the whole property. And I live in Banksville now, and we have some pictures of people coming out of the hole in the basement, you know, with a wheelbarrow full of coal, and that was simply how it was mined. But there are all sorts of mines going up. I think it's Hazelwood Avenue toward Calvary Cemetery. That was all extensively mined,
Right.
and George Junior Republic was sort of created out of the money, I think, from those mines. But there were mines all over.
Yeah, and some of those mines were owned by the Brown family, so
Down in 4 Mile Run, where the Bidwell powder manufacturer was, and the DuPont powder, a lot of that is mined, and by Squirrel Hill Turnpike and so forth. A lot of that is mined in small mines, but I'm sure it's all under mining, and that's why people stopped here.
Yes.
Helen, talking to a friend of ours that owns a lot of property in town, all of the properties, or virtually all of the properties in Pittsburgh, whether they're mines on that property, have the uniquely Pennsylvania phrase in them that the underground rights are not owned by the property owner.
Oh, yeah.
That's a key feature of Pennsylvania real estate all over, that the large companies, it must have been after 1860, somehow got a hold of control